Have you ever loved someone so much that you started to lose yourself in the process? This question holds a deep truth about the kind of love that suffocates what it seeks to protect. It's a love that stems not from a place of freedom, but from fear. Fear of loss. Fear of abandonment. Fear of never being enough. This is the kind of love that Silco, a character from Arcane, exemplifies. His story is a tragic reminder of how love, when twisted by trauma, can transform into something that destroys both the lover and the beloved. Silco's life is defined by loss. He lost the people he loved the most, and in that loss, he built walls. Walls designed to keep others safe. But ironically, they only trapped them. His heartache was not just about the physical loss of those close to him, but the emotional void it left behind. In the wake of that void, Silco became obsessed with the idea of protecting what he had left. But protection, in his case, became control. The more he tried to shield the ones he loved, the more he confined them. Silco's trauma, deeply rooted in his inability to save those he once cared for, forced him to construct a life where control became his only mechanism of survival. Every decision he made was based on the fear that if he let go, he would lose everything again. This fear led him to impose his will on those around him, especially Vi and Zahn. In his mind, love meant keeping them close enough that they could never escape, even if it meant suffocating them. It's not uncommon for people who have experienced deep trauma to develop what psychologists call a defense mechanism. Silco's defense mechanism was his intense need to control. By controlling everything around him, he believed he could ensure that nothing and no one would slip away again. This sense of control gave him a false sense of security, but it also created a growing distance between him and the people he loved. This internal conflict was the seed of Silco's downfall. On one hand, he truly wanted to protect Vi and Zahn. On the other hand, he was destroying them with his obsession. The more he tried to hold on, the more they slipped away. The trigger for this breakdown was simple: the fear of losing. For Silco, the fear of loss became a daily reality, triggering a vicious cycle of control, suffocation, and loneliness. As this cycle spun out of control, Silco reached a breaking point. The very people he wanted to protect began to rebel against him. They couldn't breathe under the weight of his love, and this led to Silco's emotional collapse. The consequence was inevitable. Silco found himself completely isolated, having driven away the people he cared for most, all in the name of protection. His fear and trauma had consumed him, leaving only a hollow shell of the person he once was. In the end, Silco's story is a powerful reminder that love, when driven by fear, can be destructive. And if we're not careful, we can lose ourselves in the very people we try to protect. So, think about this. What happens when love becomes the thing that suffocates the very people we want to save? Could it be that, in trying to hold on too tightly, we push them away forever? Silco's inner conflict is not just about the love he feels for those around him, but also about the power dynamics he has carefully built to protect himself from his greatest fear: abandonment. His entire life is driven by the fear that once someone is close to him, they will leave. This fear is rooted deep in his trauma, which is a direct result of his early life experiences, where he was powerless and felt invisible. As a result, he now seeks to dominate and control everything around him, believing that only by doing so can he ensure that those he loves will never abandon him. But the very power he craves becomes the source of his ultimate isolation. He has come to believe that control is the only way to maintain any form of connection. Yet, in his pursuit of control, he creates barriers that distance him from the very people he's trying to protect. This illusion of safety keeps him in a perpetual state of anxiety. The more he tries to control, the more he loses touch with what truly matters: trust and freedom. Silco's trauma makes him believe that love is something to be hoarded, something to possess, rather than something to share freely. His relationships, rather than being rooted in mutual understanding and connection, become entangled in a cycle of manipulation and fear. It is a defense mechanism driven by insecurity. His need for dominance over others stems from the belief that without this control, he will inevitably experience loss. This makes him incapable of seeing his actions for what they truly are: a prison for both himself and others. His belief that control equals protection makes him blind to the fact that true love requires trust and the freedom to make choices. Silko's inner conflict is centered around his inability to reconcile these two opposing desires, the desire to protect and the need to control. While he tells himself he is doing what's best for those he loves, deep down, he knows he's pushing them away. This constant battle creates a dissonance within him, where his intentions clash with the consequences of his actions. Every move he makes to protect the people he loves feels more like a tactical decision than an emotional one. It's as if love, to him, is a strategy rather than a feeling. And this leads to a growing sense of emptiness. In the end, Silko's greatest tragedy is that he can never truly connect with anyone, because he doesn't allow anyone the space to be their authentic self. They are only allowed to exist as long as they remain within the confines of his control. The trigger for his emotional breakdown is his realization that his control has alienated him from the very people he wanted to protect. When things start to unravel, when the people he loves begin to see the true nature of his actions, Silko is forced to face the terrifying truth. He is alone. The consequences of his actions are devastating, as he loses both his humanity and his connections with others. This isolation is not the result of a lack of love, but rather the result of misguided love that suffocates and destroys. Ultimately, Silko's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of trying to control what cannot be controlled. His trauma, combined with his need for dominance, turns him into a character who cannot see that true protection comes not from control, but from trust. His inability to release the grip on his fears and insecurities leaves him in a perpetual state of loneliness, unable to break free from the very patterns he has set in place. The pain that Silko feels is not just from loss, but from the constant cycle of self-sabotage he creates. If only he could let go of the need to control, perhaps he would find the freedom and love he seeks. But in the end, it is his own fear that holds him captive. Silko's internal conflict stems from his unmet needs, particularly the need for acceptance and love. At his core, he is a person who deeply craves connection, but his traumatic past has distorted his ability to form healthy relationships. Growing up with a sense of powerlessness and abandonment, Silko learned early on that love and trust were fragile. His greatest fear is that if he lets go, if he opens himself up, he will once again be abandoned, left to face the emptiness he once knew. As a result, he clings to control as a means of self-preservation. Silko's need for love is undeniable, but it is twisted by his fear of vulnerability. He seeks affection and connection, but he cannot allow himself to be vulnerable enough to receive it. Instead, he demands loyalty and submission from those around him, particularly from Vi and Zahn. In his mind, love is not about mutual respect or freedom. It is about holding on, about ensuring that no one can escape or leave. This unmet need for acceptance is what drives him to dominate, to impose his will, and to control the people around him. He believes that if he is able to manage every aspect of their lives, he can protect them from the pain he once experienced. But the more he tries to protect, the more he isolates himself. The control he exerts over others is a defense mechanism designed to shield him from the pain of being rejected. However, this defense creates a paradox. By controlling everything, Silko only distances himself from the very people he wishes to be close to. His need for connection goes unfulfilled, and the cycle of control continues, deepening his loneliness. The core of his inner conflict lies in the tension between his need for closeness and his fear of being abandoned. Silko wants to protect those he loves, but his actions push them away. This paradox is the source of his pain. He cannot reconcile his desire for intimacy with his need to control. His need for power and control is not about a thirst for domination, but rather a desperate attempt to fill the void of love, an acceptance that was never fully satisfied in his life. The more he tries to control his environment and the people in it, the more disconnected he becomes. Silko's unmet need for love and belonging is at the heart of his psychological breakdown. It manifests as an inability to trust others or allow them to make their own choices. He does not understand that true love comes with freedom, with the space to grow and make mistakes. His relationship with Vi, for example, becomes strained because he cannot offer her the freedom to choose her path. Instead, he forces her into his vision of how things should be. Silko's actions are driven by a constant need to feel secure in his relationships. But this need for security results in greater emotional distance. His internal conflict continues to grow as he struggles to understand that true connection cannot be built on control alone. His need for love is clear, but it is buried under layers of fear, insecurity, and manipulation. Silko's journey is a tragic one, marked by his inability to meet his own emotional needs and the painful consequences of his actions. His desire for connection, though strong, ultimately leads him to a place of greater isolation and despair. Silko's psychological turning point comes when he realizes that the very thing he's been trying to protect is slipping through his fingers. For years, he has operated under the assumption that by controlling everything around him, he could avoid the pain of loss. He thought that by keeping people close, by binding them to him, he would ensure their loyalty and safeguard his relationship with them. But this belief is shattered when his actions begin to have the opposite effect. The trigger for his emotional breakdown occurs when he faces the truth that his control has created a barrier between him and those he loves. He begins to see that his need for power and dominance, while rooted in a desire for protection, has turned into the very thing that pushes people away. This realization comes during moments of heightened emotional tension, particularly when Vi begins to challenge his authority and question his motives. She, once his ally, begins to pull away from him, sensing that his actions, though masked as protection, are actually suffocating. This moment is the turning point for Silko. The emotional trigger is not just the rebellion of those around him, but the recognition that his deep fear of abandonment has led him to destroy the very relationships he sought to preserve. The more he tries to dominate, the more those he loves feel trapped, forcing them to distance themselves. In this moment, Silko is forced to confront the painful truth. The control he has been clinging to has only led him further into isolation. His need for validation, for control, and for love has corrupted his understanding of what it means to truly protect someone. He realizes that the love he has been offering is conditional and manipulative, rather than unconditional and freeing. The turning point comes with the confrontation of self-awareness. He understands that his trauma and insecurities have shaped his actions, but that realization alone does not bring immediate clarity or change. Instead, it deepens his inner conflict. He is aware of what he has done, but he does not know how to fix it, leading him to feel even more isolated and desperate. This psychological trigger marks the beginning of a downward spiral, where Silko is caught between his desire for redemption and the fear that he is too far gone to fix the damage he has caused. As his relationships begin to crumble, the weight of his own decisions becomes unbearable. He has spent so much time constructing a world where he controls everything that now, in the face of loss, he feels completely powerless. The irony is that by trying to prevent pain, he has only created more of it, not just for himself, but for those around him. Silko's journey from this turning point is one of self-doubt, guilt, and the haunting realization that sometimes, the more we try to control, the more we lose what we love. This trigger moment is not just a single event, but the culmination of his internal struggle. It forces Silko to reckon with the destructive cycle he has created, and yet, it does not give him the clarity to break free. Instead, it drives him deeper into his own emotional labyrinth. Silko's psychological breakdown is marked by the realization that his life has been shaped by a false sense of control, and that the very thing he sought to protect, his relationships, has slipped through his fingers. As his influence over others begins to unravel, he finds himself drowning in a sea of self-doubt and guilt. The realization that he has become the very thing he feared the most, a source of harm, strikes him deeply. For years, Silko clung to the belief that by controlling everything around him, he could protect those he loved from the same kind of pain he experienced. However, his actions have proven otherwise. The emotional distance between him and Vi and others grows steadily as they begin to see through his manipulations. The conflict between his intentions and the consequences of his actions reaches its peak. He wanted to build a better world for those he loved, but instead, he built walls around himself and them, trapping everyone in a cycle of control and fear. The consequences of this self-imposed isolation are felt most acutely when the people he tried to protect start to pull away. It becomes increasingly clear that his need to dominate is no longer about protection, but about self-preservation. Silco's emotional world is collapsing in on itself, and he is left to confront the painful truth that love, when tied to control, is a double-edged sword. He begins to question his own worth and the authenticity of the relationships around him. The person he thought he was, a protector, begins to fade, replaced by someone trapped by his own trauma. His entire life, built on the foundation of control, now feels empty and hollow. He cannot escape the sense of loss that follows him. This breakdown leads Silco into a period of deep introspection, where he confronts his past, his fears, and the damage he has caused. For the first time, he starts to question his motives. Was he ever truly protecting anyone, or was he simply afraid of being abandoned? The fear that shaped his every action now becomes his greatest source of anguish. In the process, Silco begins to see that the very relationships he sought to hold together have been shattered by his own hand. This awareness forces him to confront the trauma that has governed his life and the realization that he is incapable of healing himself alone. The emotional collapse that follows is profound. Silco is no longer the man who controlled everything around him. Instead, he is a broken individual, disconnected from those he tried to protect and haunted by the consequences of his actions. His need for control has led to the very destruction he feared. In the end, Silco's psychological transformation is not a redemption arc, but a tragic realization of how deep self-inflicted harm can go. The breakdown reveals his vulnerability, but it is too late to repair the damage caused by years of emotional manipulation. The walls he built around himself are now his prison, and he is left to face the devastating effects of a life lived in the shadows of his own fears. The long-term psychological consequences of Silco's actions are profound and devastating. Over time, his obsessive need to control everything and everyone around him results in an overwhelming sense of isolation. This isolation is not merely physical but emotional, as Silco finds himself unable to form genuine, meaningful connections with anyone. His fear of abandonment has created an impenetrable wall between himself and those he cares about, and even when he seeks intimacy, it is tainted by the constant need for control. His psychological state becomes one of chronic anxiety and distrust, where every action he takes is driven by the fear of losing what little he has left. Over the years, this constant state of emotional turmoil corrodes Silco's ability to empathize with others, leaving him in a world where he is constantly suspicious and paranoid. His need to dominate stems not only from a desire for power, but from a deep-seated belief that the only way to avoid emotional pain is through control. The long-term effects of this mindset are clear. Silco becomes more distanced from the people he cares about, as they no longer trust him, nor can they feel safe in his presence. This lack of trust takes a toll on Silco's mental well-being, as he is forced to live in a world where he is both the puppet master and the puppet, unable to escape the strings of his own creation. Silco's internal conflict only deepens over time, as he becomes more entrenched in his defensive mechanisms and unable to break free from the emotional traps he has set for himself. His need for control has locked him in a cycle of self-sabotage, where every attempt to protect his world only leads to more destruction. His paranoia becomes a permanent part of his existence, and as he becomes increasingly consumed by it, he loses his sense of self. What remains is a man defined by his fears, unable to see the world around him with clarity. Silco's constant efforts to assert control slowly erode his mental health, leading him to a state of psychological fragmentation. His world becomes a place of constant tension, where he is never truly at peace, always on edge, and never able to feel the relief of letting go. In the end, the long-term consequences of Silco's choices are devastating not just to those around him, but to himself as well. His relationships crumble, his emotional stability deteriorates, and he becomes a prisoner of his own mind. What once may have seemed like a way to protect those he loved turns into a lifelong sentence of isolation, distrust, and deep emotional pain. Silco's emotional journey deeply resonates with the feelings of abandonment, loneliness, and being misunderstood. These emotions, central to his character, mirror the universal experience of people who feel disconnected from those around them, struggling to find a sense of belonging. Silco's fear of being abandoned is not just a fleeting concern but a core driving force in his life. Having experienced loss early on, he becomes fixated on preventing further abandonment, believing that if he could control everything, he could prevent those he cares about from leaving. This need to control stems from a deep fear of being left alone once again, a fear that haunts him at his very core. For those of us who have ever feared being abandoned, Silco's struggles are painfully familiar. He acts not out of malice, but out of fear that he will lose the only connections he has left. This constant fear manifests itself as an unyielding desire to hold on to the people around him, even if his way of doing so drives them further away. The loneliness that Silco feels is not just physical, but emotional and mental. He is trapped in a cycle where the very people he wants to protect cannot get close to him because of his controlling nature. It's a loneliness born from a deep-seated belief that no one will ever truly love him unless he keeps them under his thumb. The irony, of course, is that his actions only drive others away, deepening his sense of isolation. The longer Silco persists in his efforts to control, the more he becomes aware that he is only misunderstood. His motives, twisted by fear, are misinterpreted by those around him, and in return, they push him further into the abyss of loneliness. He is a man constantly trying to protect what he loves, but failing to understand that love cannot thrive in an environment of control. His relationships are built on a foundation of fear, not trust, which leaves him perpetually misunderstood. He believes that his actions are for the greater good, but others see them as self-serving and manipulative. This fundamental misunderstanding creates an emotional rift between him and those he wishes to protect, isolating him even more. For viewers, Silco's emotional journey might evoke memories of times when we, too, have tried to hold on to something or someone out of fear of being alone, of being misunderstood, or of not being enough. It's a universal theme that speaks to the human condition, showing how fear can distort even the purest intentions. Silco's loneliness is not unique. It's something we all face in different forms. His misunderstanding of love and his need for control reflect a deep internal conflict that resonates with anyone who has ever struggled to connect with others. In the end, his story is a powerful reminder of the destructive impact that fear and loneliness can have on relationships. Silco, like so many of us, simply wants to be loved, but he cannot see that love requires freedom and trust, not control. His tragedy lies in the fact that he never learns to open himself up to others, and as a result, he remains alone, locked in a cycle of self-sabotage and isolation. The pain he experiences is not just a product of his actions, but of the emotional void he has created within himself. For anyone who has ever felt abandoned, misunderstood, or trapped by their own fear, Silco's story is a painful, yet relatable, reflection of that emotional struggle. Silco's story is a constant reminder of how deeply the feeling of abandonment can shape someone's life. His fear of being left alone is a driving force in his actions, leading him to manipulate those around him in an effort to secure the relationships he desperately wants to preserve. This fear, rooted in his past, manifests in his need to control everything and everyone in his life. He convinces himself that by holding on tightly, he can prevent the hurt that comes with losing those he loves. But in doing so, he pushes them further away. This creates a cycle of loneliness that not only isolates Silco from others, but also leaves him feeling emotionally abandoned by those he's trying to protect. The more he tries to control, the more he distances himself from real connection. Silco's situation speaks to a universal truth. When we hold on too tightly to people or things, we often end up losing them. His emotional neglect of others, driven by his own fear and insecurities, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As his actions alienate those around him, the loneliness he feels becomes all-consuming. Silco's inability to break free from this cycle highlights a common experience many of us can relate to. How often do we isolate ourselves, thinking that we are protecting others, when in fact, we are only pushing them away? It's easy to see how Silco, with his past full of loss and hurt, could fall into this trap. He is trying to avoid pain, but the very actions he takes to avoid it are what lead to his emotional downfall. The pain of being misunderstood adds another layer to Silco's struggle. He feels as though no one sees the real him, and this compounds his sense of isolation. He believes his actions are justified, that he's doing what's necessary to protect those he loves. Yet they see him as a manipulator, someone whose intentions are warped by fear. The gap between his intention and how others perceive him only widens, leading to more feelings of misunderstanding. We have all likely felt this way at some point, wanting to protect someone, but being unable to show them the love they truly need because of our own insecurities. This is where Silco's pain is most relatable. His intentions are not malicious. They are born from a deep-seated need for connection and a fear of being left behind. However, his emotional walls prevent him from receiving the very thing he longs for: real, unconditional love and connection. The more Silco isolates himself in his quest to protect, the more he becomes entangled in a web of his own making. His fear of being abandoned leads him to abandon the most crucial element of love: trust. He cannot allow himself to trust anyone, not even those he cares for, because he believes that if he does, he will lose them. This self-fulfilling prophecy plays out in his relationships, and he is left feeling alone, trapped in his own fear. Silco's story ultimately asks us to consider how much our own fears of abandonment or being misunderstood affect our relationships. How often do we hold on too tightly, thinking we are protecting others, when we are actually suffocating the very connection we seek? It is a painful reminder that true love requires letting go, allowing others the space to grow, and trusting them not to leave. Silco's inability to do this leaves him isolated, misunderstood, and emotionally abandoned, a poignant reflection of how fear can destroy the very things we love the most. Silco's journey is a reflection of the pain that comes from desperately wanting to connect with others, but feeling unable to do so. His fear of abandonment runs deep, affecting every decision he makes. It's easy for anyone to relate to the feeling of being misunderstood, where intentions are lost in translation and actions are misinterpreted. Silco's emotional distance from others stems from his belief that he must control everything to avoid the pain of loss. This belief traps him in a cycle of isolation, where he pushes away those he wishes to protect. It's a sad reality that many of us can relate to, where our deepest fears drive us to behave in ways that only intensify the loneliness we're trying to escape. The weight of abandonment is a powerful thing. It can cause someone to question their worth, to wonder if they will ever be seen for who they truly are. Silco's actions stem from this constant fear of being left behind, yet they only further alienate him from those he loves. His desperate need for control is a defense mechanism, one that promises protection but delivers only more isolation. It's a painful irony that the more he tries to prevent people from leaving him, the more he drives them away. This dynamic speaks to a universal truth. Sometimes the fear of loss can cause us to lose everything. Silco's character serves as a reminder of how fear, unchecked and unaddressed, can distort our perception of love and relationships. His story resonates with anyone who has ever feared abandonment so deeply that it clouded their judgment and led them to act in ways that pushed people further away. Loneliness becomes a constant companion when trust is absent, and Silco's inability to trust others traps him in his own emotional prison. His life becomes one of constant vigilance, always watching for signs of betrayal, and in the process, he misses the opportunity for genuine connection. Silco's relationships are built on the shaky foundation of control, and when that foundation begins to crumble, he is left with nothing but his own fears. The pain of being misunderstood is something that many can relate to as well. Silco is a man who believes that his actions are justified, that he is protecting those he loves, but he cannot see that his methods are causing more harm than good. His intentions, though pure in their own way, are distorted by the very fear that drives him. In the end, he is misunderstood not just by those around him, but by himself as well. The emotional toll that Silco experiences is a reminder of how easily we can fall into patterns of behavior that reflect our deepest insecurities. We push people away, not because we want to, but because we're afraid of being vulnerable. We build walls around ourselves in an attempt to protect our hearts, only to realize that those walls keep everyone out, including the love we desperately need. Silco's journey is a tragic one, but it's also a reflection of the struggles many face in their own lives. His inability to see that love requires trust, freedom, and vulnerability is his downfall. His fear of abandonment and the loneliness it creates are what ultimately prevent him from having the connection he so deeply craves. His story is a warning that unchecked fear can lead to self-sabotage, leaving us isolated and misunderstood.